I'm the author of the Woodbury Murder series, which is kind of like my YA slasher love letter to Scream and Halloween. I'm also an editor for several anthologies like Halloween Night and Dark Carnival, which is kind of a love letter to Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes. I am the founder of the horror resource site, The Midnight Society, and I work for a literary agency called the Corvassier Literary Agency based out of New York. I'm also a member of the Awesome Horror Writers Association. Come visit us at 343, right? Yeah. Oh, and absolutely Tim Curry. I'm sorry. But this may be unpopular opinion, but it's my hot take. Tim Curry is the best.
Hi, I'm Alexandra Neumeister. I am secretary of the Horror Writers Association San Diego chapter. I received a degree in creative writing, a master's degree in creative writing from the University of California, Riverside Palm Desert Low Residency Program at Philadelphia. Eastern I represent. I have a short story available downstairs at booth 343 in the California Scream anthology. My story is called In Depths. It's on page 187, which is also the California Penal Code for murder. Super appropriate, and I'm excited about the page number.
Very nice.
Did you say Bill?
Oh, I haven't seen either of the movies,
Oh,
so I can't. But I like the memes, like on the internet, where it's like Tim Curry's the disappointed dad, and Bill Skarsgård is like the trying to impress him. So why can't we have both? Why not?
Exactly.
Hi guys, my name is Mark Tullius. I write fiction and nonfiction, but it's all violent. So the nonfiction, I studied MMA fighters. I used to be a fighter, so I went around the country, interviewed 340 fighters at 100 gyms, trying to find out why they did it. Now I'm doing a book on traumatic brain injuries, which is because of that. But what I love to do is write fiction. A lot of horror. Wrote Twisted Reunion. That's 28 of my short stories. Ain't No Messiah is my latest. It's about a man who's told by his father that he's the Messiah. He doesn't believe he is, but he also can't seem to die. And that's my first book in a series of 5. I have some other ones, but the young adult ones I'm doing is I have a series called Try Not to Die. They're shorter books, but they're all aimed at young adult. I'm about to release Try Not to Die in Brightside, which is based off of one of my novels. And we have Try Not to Die in Iraq and a lot of different ones. As far as which actor, I'm with Alex. I hadn't watched the new one. I don't like watching scary things, which is kind of, my friends don't believe it. But I did rent it, and I got through the first hour and a half, and it's pretty awesome and scary. So I'm going with Bill. I think that just having those the special effects you can't beat it. So.
I love those little beautiful bug eyes that you have.
And that's the one part that's not a special effect.
I know. That's him. It's all him. All right, so let's get into it. What book was your introduction to horror literature, and how did it entice you to explore more of the genre?
I can remember finding a Stephen King book at a used bookstore, and my dad let me buy it, and I was probably too young to do that, but I'd already been watching scary movies since, I was maybe 5 or 6, and I just remember my dad going, "It's not scary, turn the sound off if you get scared. If you turn the sound off, it's really not scary." And I remember going like, "It's so scary," but I tried to put on a brave face, and then, of course, R.L. Stine was my hero growing up. I read every single Goosebump book that ever existed, and Christopher Pike, and everything that kind of came down the pipeline from there. So I think we can blame maybe Halloween or The Exorcist, and then it was just downhill from there. I just couldn't stop.
Honestly, I was kind of a huge wimp when I was a kid. Like, even Goosebumps was too scary for me. But I was actually really drawn to dark stuff. So I'd say, honestly, it was the Harry Potter series. Because that actually gets surprisingly dark. Like, not even going into like, the adult metaphors of, like, Dementors are a metaphor for depression, and Death Eaters are supposed to be the Nazis. And let's not even go into Umbridge right now, but Umbridge is literally the representation of my childhood trauma in the education system. But not going into that, I listened to Harry Potter as a book on tape, which tells you how old I am. But I listened to it with my mom from a very young age, and when we got to like the 5th book, I was like, I'm gonna listen to this by myself. 5th or 6th. It was the one where Harry Potter and Dumbledore are going to find the first Horcrux. Spoiler alert, there's Horcruxes. And they went to a lake full of corpses, and part of the challenge was they couldn't touch the water, otherwise but they couldn't touch the water, but then Harry had to take a cup from the lake, and then the corpses start to rise up. I paused the tape, went to get my mom, didn't say anything, just brought her into the room, and then unpaused it to continue the story. Like I had to, it was so scary to me, but I had to continue. Like I was that invested in the story. So I've always been interested in dark things, even if I was a huge wimp. But then I went to college for writing, and I met a lot of horror writers, and they were the kinds of people who read Stephen King when they were 12, and I'm like, you're not so bad. So I gave like proper horror a chance, and I mean, now I'm here, so.
With me, I believe it was probably Choose Your Own Adventure. I think, and I'm obviously oldest here, there wasn't a lot of horror, young adult horror fiction out, but I used to love those, and for me, the goal wasn't trying to get through the book alive, like I love reading the depths. So I think that was big, and then when I got hold of Stephen King, I was probably already a teenager, and it was the short stories. The short stories were what drew me in, and then I read everything of his up until probably 10 years ago. So him and Dean Koontz were probably my biggest influences.
Have enough of a catalog to keep you reading for a while. So what were you most afraid of in your teen years? And do you feel those fears now show up when you're writing your own books now?
Absolutely. I think that you write the best stories when you write what really scares you. And so I think, when I was little, I was scared of the dark. I was also scared of clowns and fire. And when I was in high school, I was scared of toys. And, those things do show up in my writing. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes after watching scary movies and I'm in the dark and there's a strange noise in the house, I'm like, ah! So I don't know if they ever go away, but I think writing the things that creep you out really do make your writing the most fun, because you read that scene again. My goal is to give myself goosebumps. If I can read a scene that I wrote and edited and revised, and I read it again, I go, ooh, that was a little weird. I'm like, okay, I've done it, and now I'm going to send it off and hopefully try to scare someone else.
Honestly, I'd say my biggest fear was failure. And when I was a teenager, I was taking college level courses, and I almost cried because I thought I was going to get a B in an astronomy course, which in hindsight, that's kind of, even a B isn't that bad, but it was just the most important thing. I felt like my life would end if I failed even slightly at anything. And I think that continues into adulthood, but I have a different perspective on it. So I think it translates into my writing because a lot of my characters are trapped in some way, shape, or form, trapped in a town, trapped in a family, and they have an easy way out, but they're too afraid to take hold of it. So I feel like that's how I translate my fear into a narrative. It's not directly, I'm afraid of getting a B in a college course, but it gets translated into a more fantastic version of that, to the general, I'm afraid of failing. I'm afraid of just my life ending if I don't succeed in conforming to the expectations given to me. I'm back in that moment of I'm gonna fail everything.
But I work with teens, and they really it's the pressure that they have on them all the time to perform and do well and all that. So failing and the fear of failure is something that's very prevalent in the teens today.
But even now, I'm worried I'm gonna fail a panel, and I can't logically conceive of any way I could do that. But still, it comes out, and I hope that
Like, that comes out in my writing.
I won't let that happen, Alex.
Yes. Yes, we greatly appreciate our wonderful moderator.
Fear of failure has always been a big one of mine. I realized I was a perfectionist, and I was never going to be happy with myself. But I think my biggest fear was probably myself. I was suicidal just about all my life. Incredibly reckless, dangerous. That is because of all these other fears. I had fear of the dark, fear of everything. I just didn't want to show it, so I think I internalized a lot of that stuff. But those are the places I go to when I'm writing. You know, I write about the creature under the bed, or the one in the closet, or the clown outside my window, or whatever visions or things I experienced as a kid. Those are what made it onto the paper. Yeah, and I think those things don't go away, but if we write about them, they are a lesson for us.
Like
I think
it
it's a
helps.
great catharsis.
Yeah.
Huge catharsis.
So the line between middle grade and teen fiction, and then again between teen fiction and adult fiction, is sometimes very muddled. Even the YA genre as a whole is like a pretty new genre. You know, it didn't always exist as a category. So in your mind, what puts a book squarely in the YA genre?
I would say that there's definitely a gray area surrounding it, but for the most part, most people would say that it's if your main character is a teen, right? If they're within the teen age of, say, 13, 14 to 18, little wiggle room on each side. If your main character is a young person, not an adult looking back into something, but an actual young person going through something, I would say that's your general guide. Again, there's wiggle room, and sometimes publishers put out adult stuff that they, market to a young adult audience because they think it'll sell better, etc. But that's a good general guide if you're trying to figure out, do I have a young adult book or do I have an adult book? And I would say middle grade is for those in roughly middle school, maybe like, 9 to 10 to 12 to 13-ish. That's usually what I use as a guide. I don't know if you guys...
So this was literally my graduate thesis. Hope y'all have a couple hours. But I'll give you the truncated version. But to start off with, genre is completely arbitrary. Like, it's just the shelf that bookstores decided to put something on so they could sell it. But it is valuable from an academic, critical perspective to look at certain themes that are common in any genre, whether it's horror, sci-fi, fantasy, romance, what have you. And I would argue, and have argued successfully because I have an MFA out of it, that YA is an actual genre. And I would say that the defining characteristics of a YA story are that the character has agency. It's not just like Nick from The Great Gatsby observing someone. The character is the actual one who drives the narrative, and their choices drive the narrative, such as in, let's just use Harry Potter as an example. Like, he gets the invitation to Hogwarts, but he is, and his aunt and uncle are trying to prevent him from going there, but he's actively attempting to get the letters that he's being prevented from getting. Next is identity, and children, young adults are starting to explore their identity, and they're forming groups, they're excluding people, there's an us versus them, we're the young and they're the adults. And you can see that in, because everyone knows their Harry Potter house. Like, there's a very clear distinction of every group, but also there's the distinction between regular wizards and dark wizards. So it's the beginnings of developing, hi guys, it's the beginnings of developing identity politics, whether for good or ill. And a good nuanced story would look deeply into that. But sometimes we just like knowing where our house is. Sometimes that's just fun. The next is emotion. You have to deal with a lot of emotions because teenagers are experiencing the most intense emotions of their entire lives. Everything is being experienced for the first time, so it's the most intense thing that they've ever experienced. And you can do that like Twilight style with very flowery, melodramatic emotions, but like you can also do that with concrete imagery, like my whole family. This is an example from a story called Tin Star by Cecil Castellucci, which is amazing. You should read it. But she used very concrete language after the main character's family just died. Literally, a spaceship exploded, and everyone she'd ever knew had died. And she used very simple concrete language, but then suddenly she saw a flower, and it became a little bit more poetic, and you could see her starting to recover. I swear there's only 5, almost done. Next is coming of age, which, obviously there's the traditional coming of age narrative, but you have to consider how a young adult is viewing the world differently now that they are gaining more information. For example, in Harry Potter, he was like, oh yeah, my parents are great, awesome, all the wizards are good except for the asshole Death Eaters. But then he finds out more information from Snape's memories that my dad was kind of an asshole. So he understands now there's nuance to every person's character. We are people, we are all flawed, it just matters what our actions are. His dad ultimately did not join the wizard Nazis, so, whereas Snape did, so points for that. And finally, what I would say is what I would consider the most important element of a young adult story is that it must end with hope. And I'm not saying it has to have a happy ending, because we are in the horror convention on the horror panel, so not everything has to be happy flowers, rainbows, and unicorns. But there's a novel by Cherie L. Smith called Orleans. Once again, you should definitely read it, but I'm going to spoil it, so cover your ears. The main character is heavily implied to die at the end, but it's a very hopeful ending because her sacrifice allows others to escape and potentially have a cure that saves the world and improves everybody else's lives. So teenagers are just beginning their lives. They have hope for the future. Everything is expanding, so you kind of have to reflect that in a story. Once again, it doesn't have to be rainbows and unicorns, but there has to be some sense that things will get better, the world will expand. And that was my thesis. Hope you enjoyed it.
I learned a lot because I'm not the expert on young adult fiction. Usually when I want to try out an idea, I'll read it to my 11-year-old daughter, and if she screams that night and wakes us all up, I was like, okay, that's not young adult. But I do. She always wants to read my work, but I don't know. In my head, it comes down to, and maybe this is super simplified, but less sex, less violence, less graphicness. With Try Not to Die at Grandma's house, there aren't any curse words at all, which is, I'm usually pretty foul-mouthed. And the violence is toned down, but there's still a death in the family. His parents still die. He's still worried about his sister dying. There's awful stuff that happens. There's a good amount of hope. With my novel, then my second one that's coming out right now is Try Not to Die in Brightside, based off of an adult book. Brightside is for adults, it's written for adults, so I didn't know how I was going to make it a young adult version, with keeping it honest. But I grabbed a 16-year-old character, a female, from that book. And since it's her point of view, she doesn't curse a lot. She doesn't, her feelings about sex are not nearly as intense as the 28-year-old man that rescues her. And so I was able to keep it young adult. And so, I don't know, teenagers are dealing with everything. One of them, I mentioned earlier, is Try Not to Die in Iraq. It's with writing that with a buddy of mine that served in Iraq. The stuff that he described to me, the stuff that's going to be in the book, is graphic, but it's true and it's honest, and that's what he experienced, and that's what these other 18 and 19-year-old kids that are going overseas to fight, that's what they're experiencing. So, we'll cut down on the language a little bit, but want to be real to the story. And I think that's stuff that kids could benefit reading.
I apologize. The only thing I'd say about YA has less violence, that's only because of gatekeepers, like publishers, parents, librarians, no offense.
But like adults are like, oh, we can't show this to our kids, but kids are like, yeah, I'm gonna read The Shining when I'm 12. So like, and that was actually the final argument of my thesis, that The Shining is actually a YA novel according to my criteria, because it does have all the things that I won't mention again, just to not take up more time, but it does have a hopeful ending. Like, people die, but Danny lives, and there's potential for a brighter future for him. It obviously didn't turn out that way if you read the sequel, Dr. Sleep. I mean, at least he's not dead. Yeah. That's a hopeful ending in a Stephen King story.
Well, actually, what librarians do know is that YA can be very violent, and kids do curse quite a bit in these books. And actually, that's what gets YA fiction on those banned book lists more than any other books that you can have in the library, because parents find out what's inside those books.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh no, we can't have our kids reading it. And so they ask the schools or the libraries to take it out of the collections. And then we have to do a bunch of like work to see like where should it go, how should we respond to this. And everyone has their own opinions on that, but
But
yeah,
it's the parents who are the gatekeepers, not
parents
the
are the
kids.
gatekeepers. The publishing industry seems to be okay with having some gore and some really violent things. Like, I remember reading a book where this girl was being tortured by her father, basically, and like she was being sewn into the bed, like just very gruesome stuff. And like, this is a book that we have in our collection, and it got through the whole publishing process through traditional means. And so, you know, that's kind of why it's important to ask the question, like, what is YA? Because it seems that that's a very adult situation to me, but it's something that teens deal with. Some teens do deal with these kinds of situations. And so, should we say that YA is more about teen reality than anything else? I don't know.
I think that's right.
Well, teen reality filtered through like monsters and
Yes,
stuff.
with monsters. Teen reality with monsters. So going back to that line between middle grade and YA fiction, there's been a lot of discussion in the YA community lately about the lack of like young voices in teen fiction. Like, there seems to be very mature, actually more new adult than anything else. It just seems like publishing is skewing more in that direction with more mature voices. So why do you think this is happening? And what is your stance on the need for a younger, less mature protagonist that actually straddle more of the like just turned 13 than anything else?
I feel like a lot of middle grade readers want to read up. I mean, I did when I was in middle school. I was reading high school books. I was reading The Shining when I was in middle school, and in 6th grade that would have been elementary school for me. So I would say, first off, that you can read any age group, right, any genre, no matter how old you are. I would say it really just depends on the publisher personally, because you know, we sell new adult books to publishers in the agency that I work for, but it's not really, doesn't really sell unless it's romance. It sells really well if it's new adult romance, but still publishers are buying a ton of it, at least from our agency that we see. It's just hard to say. I would say that I do agree that there's a lot more serious topics in young adult that makes it maybe feel like it's more geared towards new adult or the older audiences, but at the same time I think people are just finally coming around to the realization that young adults deal with a lot of shit. There's a lot of things that we didn't talk about because it wasn't polite for a really long time, and I think to bat an eye to that and say, oh, teens don't deal with that yet is just not true. So I would say that I appreciate that people are allowing things through the gate, so to speak, to be published and be okay with talking about serious topics, because that's the reality that we live in.
I can tell you exactly why there's a more push towards older voices, and it's because the generation that grew up reading Harry Potter, Hunger Games, Twilight, all the major YA stories are now adults, and they are transferring the style of writing, the style of storytelling that they grew up with into their own writing. So now all the general group of writers are using that style. And I, for what in general, I'm for it. Like, I would like to see more new adult, but I would like to see the YA voice transferred onto different kinds of adult protagonists. Like, it's new adult is mostly romance, but I'd like to see, you know, some millennial working a dead-end job at Walmart or whatever, but then suddenly the world is about to end and they have to save it. So, like, I'd like to see different genres with that voice, with that similar tone, style, what have you. I'd say it's probably harder to get into like a just turned 13-year-old mindset, or even younger than that, when you are an adult. And if you are actually just turning 13, you don't have the experience in writing to make I'm certainly met some 13-year-olds who are pretty good at writing, but in general, there's not as many of them who have like I've been actually physically writing out stories for several years, and I have gotten good at them, because everything takes practice. So it's harder to slip into that mindset of an age that was so far away, farther for some than others. But I think if you put the work into it, you can make a very good protagonist who is much younger, and I think there is value in that kind of narrative. That being said, a lot of people don't want to put the work into it, so I can see where there's a change towards more older, new adult style voices, and I think that's great. I want all variety of stories. I want every kind of story told by every kind of person, but let's please no more romance and new adult, like other stuff, please. Thank you very much.
I think you both have great points. The reading up is huge. My daughter has been reading at such a high level. My wife and I both did that. My son, who's only 6, he wants stuff that's more mature. I think if you quizzed every kid out there, they've all probably seen every Marvel movie, and with a ton of violence and everything else. I think they want that next level. And then a lot of, like, I couldn't tap in, maybe I could, but not for a novel, tap into that voice of a 12 or 13-year-old. I think it's a little harder. Not much, remembering where you were at 17, 18, those critical years is probably a little bit easier. And I'm sure that's a great market, but for me, I just wouldn't be as interested in writing it. My daughter wants to do Try Not to Die with me, and she wanted to do it in art class, where she creates this monster by drawing it, it comes to life, and all terrible stuff happens. And we might do it, but even then, I don't know. So it's like I could do it if I was jumping in on someone else, and if I'm working with a young author, then that'd be fun. But otherwise, I think I'm definitely sticking to the more adult life.
You should do it just for the manuscript to have it.
Yeah, we actually are doing I'm writing a trilogy with her, a fantasy trilogy, and I have the cover tattooed on my back.
Oh,
Yeah, my kids each got to pick what animal. My son picked a lion, and my daughter picked a huge dragon. So
nice.
it took about 80 hours.
Well, Jolene, you're an agent. Do you think that your agency or even others that you're familiar with are looking for those like younger protagonists right now, or like do you think the market for young adult is just gonna want those more mature voices? Like what are we doing with our 13 or even maybe our 12-year-olds that like want to be the young adult but aren't really ready for those older books?
Yeah, I think I'm an agent assistant, so just so you guys know, not an actual agent, an agent assistant, but we really are always looking for different voices. Plenty of the agents in my agency are looking for middle grade voices, young YA perspectives, and even upper. I think it's all over the board, and the difference would be who they pitch your book to, right? If we have clean publishers or ones that are known to have a preference for younger voices, we would just pitch those imprints and those editors. That's why it's really important to get a good agent who knows editors well, or at least what editors want, so that they can tailor pitches to them appropriately so they can sell your work. So I would say there's definitely still a need for all of those voices. YA is so popular, and we sell plenty of books that are not super edgy and racy to publishers, and we have plenty on the flip side as well that are edgy and racy and are still YA. So
When you're writing horror, do you ever find yourself self-censoring? I think, Mark, you said you do kind of like tone it down a bit. So like what lines do you draw for yourself, and do you think that it's appropriate to self-censor when you're writing for this age group?
I don't self-censor when I'm writing. I just let them have it. I let all of my YA characters get exposed to terrible fiery deaths, and then, I just let them have it. I don't discriminate there. I don't know. I don't really self-censor. I just read. Have you guys read Danielle Vega? She's Danielle Rollins now. She's a YA author, and she's put out some awesome, scary books. She has a new one out this June that's called The Haunted. And it's got everything. It's a YA book. It's got death, torture, a child dies in that, which is pretty rare for YA. It's got zombies, ghosts, hallucinations, love scenes. It's got everything that people who don't read YA say, oh, that can't be in a YA book. But it is. It's in there, and it's really, really good. So I think the point is to just read far and wide, and I think you'll see that YA covers the borders.
In my own work, I tend to have to push myself to be a little bit more violent because I don't naturally gravitate toward gratuitous violence or anything like that in what I enjoy, in the media I enjoy consuming as well as what I write. But I look at it as, and I look at violence and swearing and all that kind of thing as ammo in the zombie apocalypse. You need to conserve it, but when you do use it, you need to put it in exactly the right place to have the most impact. So for example, if you only want to use one F-bomb in your story, make it count. Like, put it in exactly the right place to make it the most shocking. Because if you drop F-bombs every other page, then it's going to lose its impact. And same thing with violence. Like, I'd rather describe someone getting impaled slowly through their chest with vivid detail that is very disturbing and gory than like have someone swing around a machete and chop off heads every which way. Because when you're always cranking it up to 11, it eventually becomes white noise, and it's as if you were staying at 1. So that's the way I like to do it from a craft level, at least.
With censoring, I try not to censor myself, especially at the start. Like, I figured that could come later on. So when you're editing, you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe we need to tone this down. Maybe we cut that out. I generally, like in my adult fiction, I'll look for all the F words and I'll try to cut them in half. Like my last one, I cut out over 100. I was like, this is unnecessary. Yeah. So there's quite a few.
That was like half the book.
Yeah. But again, those characters in those situations, like they curse. So I'd say the censoring comes after. Like, just tell the story the way it's supposed to come. And I often surprise myself. Like, with my, I'm working on the sequel of Bright Side right now, and I was like, oh my God. I was like, I had no idea it was going to be this violent. Like, I didn't want it this violent, but that's where the story went. And there's a sword involved, and people get stabbed through the throat, and all kinds of fun stuff. And I have to let it go.
So I feel like the world has changed so much since I graduated from high school. So how do you tap into the concerns and ultimately the fears of a generation that's facing some grim realities that I'm not sure any of us had to grapple with at the same age? Like, I think we've had more mass shootings this year than we've had days in the year at this point. And, I think what scientists are saying is that it's actually too late and we're going to see like major effects from climate change. So our young people are dealing with some like crazy shit right now. So how do you tap into that and put that into your fiction?
It's a good question. I feel like what we were all kind of saying earlier about writing what we know and what scared us when we were teens, I think is part of it, right? Because, we're always going to be scared of failing, right? Or scared of maybe the dark, or we're all going to have those universal fears that no matter what, when you were born, you may have experienced yourself. But I think you're right. I think it's important that if we're going to continue to write YA and try to represent young adults that we listen. And there's so many different ways that you can do that, but I think it's really important that if you're writing for an audience, you take the time to listen to them. You can do that on Twitter, Instagram, some other way. You can work in a library, in a school, or however you do it. Tap into those young nieces and nephews or kids who are choosing tattoos for your back. Tap into that audience, because you're not going to be a great representation of that voice unless you listen to them and give it to them.
Honestly, the best way to tackle a universal issue is to make it as specific as possible. So you can, for example, write a book about a mass shooting. But you're not just going to write it like a news report, because people don't respond to statistics. They respond to narratives. They respond to stories about people. So if you're going to write a book about a mass shooting, you don't write it like a news article. You write about a kid who was in a mass shooting, or their sibling was in a mass shooting. You don't want to go too far, because then it's not personal to that kid. But the more specific you make that experience, the more universal it becomes. Like, oh, I felt that fear. I've been in that kind of situation, even if it wasn't that specific situation. But you take on those broad universal emotions and you make them more specific. And that's how you can deal with these big universal issues that everyone faces. Because a kid's not gonna, kids hate watching the news. At least I did. I hated watching news, but they're gonna respond to somebody, oh my gosh, that's a kid just like me in a situation that I might be in. Is that how I would react? How would they think about how would I react if I were in this situation? Because we really do connect to fictional characters. Like, we relate to them on a deep level. It's something in our biology that we need to relate to people and socialize. So if you create a character to deal with these situations that a kid might go through, that a kid has gone through, or that they might go through, like if you're trying to get a kid who's like maybe been privileged to relate to people from like different backgrounds, from different walks of life, you don't say, again, you don't show them statistics, you show them a story. Like that's how we're getting improved gay, like that's how we got gay marriage, because there were gay characters on sitcoms and whatnot. Like, oh, that's a normal person I can relate to. That's not scary. Like, sure, I'll vote for them to, have equal rights and things like that. But you just make characters people can relate to. You make a universal experience specific and hope for the best.
Question one more time. There's the brain damage coming in.
So kids today, they're dealing with a lot of scary shit.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
the reality of being a young person today is, and looking towards the future seems a little daunting to me, and more than what I know that I had to deal with when I was growing up.
Yeah.
So how do you tap into that to produce writing that might actually scare someone that's like really dealing with some shit?
Well, I think there probably is more fear, but I think all fear boils down to a fear of death. Like, it might be a fear of change, fear of in a relationship, end of something, but it really is a fear of death. And we all have fear. As a kid, I remember the Cold War was big, like in our family, so I was worried about nuclear war. I was worried, and my dad was always calling up and protesting war, so I thought like we were going to go to war. And then riots and shootings, and now it's so much more. But I think it's always there. And then if you're paying attention to, tapping into other people that are that age, or just watching the news, it's easy to plug into one of those situations and then kind of write about it. You can put yourself in those situations. Like if you can empathize with anyone, I think that's all it takes.
Let's go ahead and take some questions. Does anyone have anything they want to ask the panel about writing YA fiction?
I have a question. For the middle speaker, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. You said if you're going to write a younger YA protagonist, you need to do the work. to find that voice? Well, how do you define doing the work?
First of all, I'd just like to say, all good stories require work. Like it's not unique to that specific problem. Like you do have to put in the effort. But from a craft perspective, I think about like, I try to go back to where, how, I start off by going back to how I remember physically feeling about things when I was that age. Like what was overwhelming for me, for horror specifically, and like how I can translate that into something more fantastical. Like I had a lot of sensory issues as a kid, so a lot of my threats and monsters are like a lot about sound or about touching. And again, it takes a lot of craft ability, like, and I say craft because I did get an MFA. I hate to keep bringing that up, but like, I just mean it's hard to describe in layman's terms, but I'll do my best.
No, I'm sorry. No, but I don't want to use academic terms when people don't have the same background.
It's like, I don't want to use the jargon, but I focus on it with physical, concrete details because that's what was most distinct to me when I was that age. And it takes a lot of work to find the right words to describe that in a way that a child would think about, like, but still have a poetic narrative. Like I can't just say, "Ow, this hurts," which is probably what I literally said when I was that age. I have to describe it was burning me in this particular way or that particular way. It's basically all writing is just finding the words that are most engaging, but also clear and accurate.
So do we think we have to regress a bit then when we're writing for a younger voice?
Yeah, I think so. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes, like, you didn't have a good childhood. Sometimes you have to regress to a traumatic time in your life, and some people don't want to do that. And I can respect that, but you're probably not going to get a deep, true story for that. And not every story has to be, like, super traumatic and, like, deep about that. Sometimes you're just writing, like, sometimes you're writing, I'm just shooting aliens, a bunch of them. And it's okay to have, like, a middle grade story about that, and that can be fun. But if you want to have a deep, crafted narrative, you have to look into yourself and then find the right words to describe that, which is 90% of a writer's struggle. Like, I need this exact word to describe what I'm feeling, but I can't find it in the dictionary. Yes?
You had mentioned band books. I thought that was interesting. Why band more than any other kind of genre?
Yeah.
Kind of two parts. I want to know specifically what are some specifics that got both band, and then do you think that getting your book banned increases its marketability? Does the demand increase for it? I know I want to read this book.
So a few things will get a book banned.
Repeat the question, please.
He's talking about banned books and what might get a book banned, and also does being banned increase the marketability of the book. So some things that will get a book banned really quickly is definitely sex. Sex in a book will get people riled up.
Graphic sex or just kind of alluding to it?
Even just like alluding to it, like really like. Let's see. I'm trying to think of a good example.
Well, we all know no one before 18 has sex, so.
No, absolutely not. There's no teen pregnancy crisis at all. But even like, and this is probably coming more from like deep Christian communities that like don't want their kids reading like anything that's not like Bambi or anything like that. So they look at a book and it has like two kids touching each other, and it like seems a little suggestive that, oh no, my kid can't read that. So things that they perceive to be overly sexual, which can be like extremely sexual, like was that the Call Me by Your Name, where the kid like eats a peach with cum on it from his boyfriend.
I don't want to read that.
I mean, a lot of people do that. A lot of kids do. There's some movies. And then, violence will get one. Things with cursing in it, like Huck Finn keeps getting banned still to this day. Yeah. Harry Potter gets banned all the time because wizards, and you can't. That's evil. Can't.
If they read about wizards, then they might wizard themselves.
They might join Satan if they read about wizards. So that's what banning is about mostly. And so I don't think that. Oh, you know what? I just thought of a good example for the sex one is this book called Speak by Lauren Salerno. And that one really surprised me and saddened me a lot to the point where I actually wrote someone about it. I wrote the people who were involved in this because actually the sex in that book is a rape. And they thought that you can't be reading books about sex, but actually it's a book about a girl dealing with something that has happened to her that kids that age and younger are dealing with all the time. And if we can't talk about it in the classroom and we can't talk about it in books and we can't give our kids an outlet to talk about this kind of stuff, then what are they supposed to do when they encounter it in real life? And I think that's the importance of making sure that we allow kids to read about all types of situations and keep things off of banned books lists and keep things in our libraries and in our curriculums, because kids are living lives that you would ban a book about every day. So, does it increase marketability? I mean, I think Harry Potter's doing well.
I've heard about that.
Speak is doing well. I don't think that kids or even the people who are buying the books care whether it's been banned. Usually if it's caught the attention of someone to be banned, it's already kind of popular to begin with. I do know of a book in a college library that was banned. It was like a student publication of short stories and poems and that kind of stuff. But it featured a school shooting, and the administration decided that they didn't want to have that around, and so instead of banning it completely and outright, they kind of fought to get this anthology still published and put out. But what they did is they wrapped the book in plastic and put a sticker on it and said that this book contains imagery that might be found offensive and
So
that.
that boosts the marketing.
So in that instance, I was like, yes, I'm buying this book. So it all depends. A lot of times they're already popular books,
But the thing is also, we have this thing called the internet. Banning books might have mattered way back in the olden days, and even if a kid doesn't necessarily have a smartphone on them all the time, you can find somewhere at the internet and either buy it or hopefully not pirate it. Although if anybody had the right to pirate something, I should hope it's a kid trying to read a banned book. Don't, piracy is a crime, don't steal. But if you're an underprivileged teenager trying to ban a book, trying to read a banned book, there's a little wiggle room.
There's even a read banned books week now.
Yeah.
There's a counterculture going where we
Yeah.
celebrate it for what it is.
Banned books are cool.
yep, I read them. Yeah.
What kind of word count are you looking at for the different age ranges?
Good question.
I thought he said award count, and I'm like,
Word count.
so far 0?
Yeah, 50 is on the low end probably for YA. You're probably looking more 60 65 roughly more for fantasy, YA fantasy.
Did you say middle grade?
Use YA.
How about middle grade?
I think it depends, like maybe 40 to 65-ish probably is a good range. Usually the lower end is where you don't want to be. Usually you want to be towards the middle of that range.
What's the question?
Oh, the question was, what is the word count range for YA books? It used to be 50, and I feel like expectations have rose. So a lot of times if our agency gets books that's a YA book and it's under 50, it will be auto-declined because they feel like there's no way you can have all the world building and tell the story and have that deep point of view and have the character depth, etc. with 40,000 words. It just won't be there yet. Good question.
So in the panel, there was a lot of talk about what is YA, how do we define YA, and so what I'm getting from each of you is that there's no, that anything could be a YA, The Shining could be a YA, but for those of us who are coming into YA as a genre fresh, what are some things that you would say is definitely not YA? Like, I would say that this is not a YA book, which might be a little easier to help with that definition.
Thank you for looking at me. So right off the top of my head, and once again I use these for my thesis, The Road, I would say, because there is a child character in that, but I would say there's no hope at the end of that. The biosphere is literally gone. Everyone is going to die. It's just a matter of when. And that's just too bleak. And you could have a story like that. You could have an environment like that in a setting in the YA style, voice, whatever you want to say about it. But like that specific story, like, oh, we're all just going to die. There's literally no hope. I don't think that fits with the YA style. According to my criteria. Once again, everybody has different criteria. And a story by Nina Rovar called Wing Shooters, which I read in college, and I use that as an example because the protagonist is a child, but it's written from the perspective of the adult character looking back at her child self. So I would consider that not a YA because it's an adult voice just being filtered through the memories of a child. And like I was saying, like it's different to have a child voice, and it's harder to make a nuanced, realistic, naturalistic child voice than it is just to reflect on your childhood as an adult. So someone looking back on their past is in YA. Someone like a completely bleak, hopeless, grim, dark story is in YA, in my opinion. And honestly, that's my criteria for it. But I think there's a strong argument for that.
Most agencies, to them, if it's anything other than a young adult experiencing a story and actually in real time, it's happening right now, not a recollection, that is a YA. Anything that is not that, like an adult looking back, as you just mentioned, or a middle school kid or elementary school kid doing something, that's not YA. It has to be a teen experiencing something in real time and they're going through it. That is what makes YA YA. If we get anything pitched that says YA and it's not that, we reject it.
That being said, I'm going to break my own rule. Brandon Sanderson has a great YA series called Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians. Once again, no offense to the librarian on the panel, which is technically his like memoirs and like reflecting, but it's like from the child. It's got the voice of a teenage narrator, so it doesn't feel like that when you're reading it. Go read Brandon Sanderson.
I would also say too that I don't think the adults or the parents or anyone can come to the aid of the kids to save the day. It has to be the kids that work through the problems themselves, no matter what that problem is. So,
That's why there's so many dead parents.
so many dead parents, so many like absent parents, like where are they? Like where are these kids allowed to do these things? But that is a hallmark of YA, is that the kids have to do their own work. So I think we're at time. One more question, there we go.
I'm just wondering how much you think needs to be resolved at the end if you're working on something that might turn into a multi-part story, and the end of the first novel, there's something significant that's unresolved, like something that's changed that in order for things to be smooth for one of the secondary characters needs to change back, but it cuts off, like, and with the hope that there'll be something more, that'll get resolved next time, and whether you see that as problematic, or how much do things need to be solid and clarified?
It's a good question.
I think that's where subplots come in handy as a narrative device, because you should have a main narrative push, like we have to get this artifact or the world will blow up. But you can have a bunch of subplots surrounding that, and not all of those have to be resolved. So we got the artifact, we stopped it, but the dastardly villain got away and will menace us again in the next book. And you do have to be careful about that, because you don't want it to be disappointingly unresolved, but like having those dangling narrative threads, as long as you get the main one resolved satisfactorily, then you can leave other things to be solved later on in the series.
I don't know if you're plotting it out, but it may help for you to plot out what that would look like. I don't know where you are in the writing process, but usually that's what's helpful if you think this might be a 3-part book. They're a 3-book installment. If for our agency, for example, I use that lens. If we get a book, normally if it's a first-time author who's never published a book before, we may only want that first book. We may not be interested in selling a series because you've never sold a book before. I don't have a sales history for you. But if you approach it and say, hey, look, this book wraps up all the plots, all the subplots, but I do envision it as a 3-book series, here's how that might go, then that's a totally other thing, and it actually might work in your favor. You know what I mean? So the book has to stand on its own if you were ever to be pitching it to be sold. The book should be able to stand on its own.
Just as a side note, something I would say to really be aware of is make sure you're cool with all your characters the way they are. I made the mistake of shooting one of my characters through the collarbone at the end of book 1, not knowing there was going to be a book 2. Now book 2, I had to have this guy with a bullet wound. So be very careful of all your characters. Make sure all that is solid before you put out that first book.